Hello and welcome to India Today and Business Today. I'm Siddharth Zarabi. Rising trade barriers, slowing global growth and shifting economic dynamics, the World Economic Forum's 2025 outlook is packed with several red flags. But amidst all that uncertainty, India stands out as that one bright spot all across the world. And joining us to unpack the current economic climate, what's happening globally with trade and business and India's role in the evolving international order is the President and CEO of the World Economic Forum, Borge Brende. Welcome to the show. With me, my colleague, Rajdeep Sardesai, the consulting editor of India Today TV. Borge, I'm going to take it at the top and basically get you to tell our viewers about your reading of the world economy at this point of time and what is happening as far as the various structural forces that seem to be reshaping the global economy as we know it.
Firstly, thank you for inviting me to your show. And it is true that the global growth is more sluggish than it was in the last decades. But with the geopolitical backdrop that we are faced with, the most complicated one maybe since the Second World War, the global economy is more resilient than expected. And as you said, there are some real drivers of growth still, fortunately. And of the largest economies of the world, India is the bright spot. It is really doing well. And the last quarter, it even did better than expected, 7.5% growth. If it continues like this, India will be the third largest economy in the world, $5 trillion US, maybe already this year, and take over the third place from Japan.
But Mr. Brende, somewhere, what, according to you, are the key structural forces that are creating this uncertainty as you described? These are extraordinary times. According to you, if I were to ask you 1, 2, 3, the three concerns that you have as we look ahead, given the fact that your economic outlook shows growing pessimism about global growth.
I would say the most challenging thing would be a full-fledged war in addition to the conflict in Ukraine today. It could have been, for example, a war with Iran. It seems less likely because there are now constructive talks between the Americans and the Iranians taking place in Oman. But you never know on the geopolitics. It could be India, Pakistan, seems like that calmed down too. It could be also things, other places in Asia. Second.
Yes, go ahead.
The second thing would be the trade wars that could develop in a decoupling manner, so it could really have severe impact on global growth. So far, it has not been good news for the global growth. We are far below trend growth. We had trend growth the last decades close to 4%. Now the global trend growth is maybe even less than 3%. And their trade was the driver of growth for these decades, and trade is now growing slower than the global growth. So that would be the second challenge. And the third one, to be very short, is the global debt, because we haven't seen so much global debt since the Second World War, and many countries are struggling with this.
Borge, one of the key things is the United States seeking to reshape the world trade order. Almost 40 years of trade, and that's benefited emerging economies like India as well. And that exercise seems to be still work in progress. What's your own reading of the new trade reset that is likely to happen in July? Because we keep getting one view and then the other view just a day after.
There is a changing landscape. It's a full-time job to follow the latest, so it keeps the news very active, the news cycle. I would say that there is also a change in trade that is more structural, where we have to start a deep dive. Trade in manufacturing was the driver of trade, production of different products and all this. Where we see now the real growth in trade is in services and in digital trade. These two areas are growing 3 times faster than the trade in manufacturing. And I think this is one of the reasons why India is doing relatively well, because India is very strong on services and is very strong relatively also on digital trade. And then there are, of course, other topics related to trade barriers and tariffs and all that. I could go deeper into that too, of course.
Let's go deeper into that, the trade barriers and tariffs in particular, and the constant uncertainty, Mr. Brende, over what the United States will do next, what the Trump administration will do next. Is that something that makes the world even a more difficult place to manage? If tariffs are constantly going to be revised, are constantly the subject of negotiations, where does that leave the most certain World Trade Organization, and where does it leave the world in this Trumpian universe that we are now seeing?
So there is a lot to unpack there. As I said at the outset, it is surprising how strong and resilient the global economy has been so far. It is growing around 3%. That's not bad. It's not as good as in the past. But the tariffs are creating uncertainty. But what we've seen in the last week that adds uncertainty is that it's not only about tariffs, but you also see that one is doing policies related to trade around licensing. So the Chinese are not exporting a rare earth as in the past, and then there is tit for tat. Americans then don't export important parts, for example, aircraft engines. So we have the tariffs, and then we have also trade barriers coming up. On the tariffs, it is intense negotiations going on. The UK made a deal with the Trump administration. Now EU is the largest market in the world, is negotiating, and the threat is 40–50% tariffs imposed 9th of July if there is not a solution. What we've seen so far, though, it has a tendency to reach a solution in those negotiations. So let's see, but of course the US-China piece being the most complex one, because they're almost 50% of the global economy together. So if that is not going well, because there have been hiccups in the last days, that's a one to watch.
Borge, does it therefore mean that globalization as we know it has been permanently redefined, and a new era of industrial segregation will come across, where the US picks and chooses what suits its interests best, and other economies have to deal with sort of the mass level industrial activities later on?
It is true that we had a geopolitical world order after the Cold War. That one is not there anymore. So we don't exactly know what the new world order is going to be. Hopefully it's not like the law of the jungle growing back. Also on the trade piece, it is true that the globalization that we had in the past, that you just follow the comparative advantages, you bought the input factors wherever it was cheapest and best. Now we are seeing also after COVID that companies and countries are securing their supply chains in a way that just in time is not good enough. Also you have to have just in case. I think some of that makes sense. It is more, there's no friend shoring, that you then trade with the countries that you feel are your friends is complicating it. Then you also have home shoring and nearshoring, and that's, I think, what you're alluding to. You want to have production in your country and not necessarily import. What we also will need to know, though, that can lead to higher prices, and inflation is also a problem. Many leaders want to bring down inflation. That was also one of the important things for Mr. Trump. He said inflation and immigration, the two I's. And to get inflation down, you also, of course, cannot see that the price of what consumers are buying is increasing. So there are many trade-offs here. I would say that the summer will show us more on how the tariffs are developing. And also we have seen an additional complicating factor is the legal situation on the tariffs in the US. Can that provision being used that have so far introduced the tariffs, does this go all the way to the Supreme Court? Has the administration to possibly use more cumbersome legislation to get through possible tariffs? So there's many unknowns here still.
Mr. Brende, in your initial answer, you spoke about how India is among the more resilient economies in the world, almost a standout in these times, in these tough times that the world economies are facing. How do you assess India's evolving role in global supply chains, its growing strategic influence in shaping multilateral agendas? Do you believe that India in particular is now in a sweet spot of sorts as the world looks possibly even beyond China to find new global supply chains?
The short answer is yes. India's influence is going to grow for every decade in this century. Just the last decade, India doubled its GDP. And if India is able to keep up a growth between 6 and 7% in the coming years, it's going to be a $10 trillion economy very, very soon. Then India has also, at least so far, benefited from this friendshoring. You've seen that manufacturing has been diversifying. Like a few years ago, there were no iPhones produced in India. No, 25% of the production comes from India. But there we're also seeing the first questions now. I think that the US administration has said, yeah, but these iPhones should be produced in the US. But as I said, India also has a huge opportunity because of its demographic dividend. The median age in India is 28 years old. So the workforce is growing every year, and there is a lot of very savvy young people that are tech savvy that helps also when it comes to the digital revolution that we are faced with. But if India is going to keep the growth, of course, the deregulation, less red tape, better infrastructure, that the states communicate better with each other and all this, the reforms have to continue. But if it does, India will geopolitically and geoeconomically play a significant role also in the coming decades.
Because, one of the challenges, Mr. Brende, for countries like India as well, you mentioned the demographic dividend, but we also have a demographic bulge in a way of millions of people entering the job market every month. And in the age of AI, will we be able to create sufficient jobs to cater to this large demand out there, this aspirational India? That's not just an Indian problem. It's become a global problem. How are you going to, along with growth, ensure greater employment? Is that the challenge in a way of the times in which we live?
It is, but it's also a great opportunity. With every paradigm shift in technology, it can reduce or kill some jobs, but it can also develop new jobs higher up in the value chain that pays better. So, artificial intelligence is a huge impact factor on productivity. So our economists are saying that if you implement AI in a very proactive way, it can increase your productivity with 10%. And that's productivity gains we haven't seen for decades. And productivity, what is that? That is prosperity. It's like producing more for less. And then that gain can be reinvested. So, of course, there are jobs that are not going to exist in the future. In a way, I think India is better positioned because you do have a young population that is tech savvy. Yep. You're strong on services. You're also strong on the digital trade with this also digital IDs that you have. It is a comparative advantage, but of course, it's very hard to then know what is happening in the future. But I think all changes can also be a good thing. You know, it's hard to predict where the jobs are coming from. Look in Switzerland. I'm in Geneva now. 100 years ago, 95% of the Swiss population worked in the agriculture sector. Now it's 2%, and they produce much more food than they did when 95% of the population worked in the agriculture sector 100 years ago. So you couldn't keep everyone there. It's a good thing that they moved on. Now they work in pharmaceuticals, they work in banks, they're better paid, and Switzerland is one of the richest countries in the world because they were actively saying yes to reforms and future-oriented policies.
Borge, one of the leading search engines has said, AI search engines, that India is one of the largest user markets for it. But given that context and the debate that has been had over the past couple of years, which is regulating AI so that it does not lead to an increase in inequality, what's your stand and the forum's stand on that?
I think the jury is out, to be honest. You know, the platform economy had a tendency of the winner takes it all. It was the big tech platforms, kind of private superpowers that had big market share. One could think that the start of the AI also would be a more the winner takes it all, because you need trillions of US dollars to invest in this hardware phase where you have the big language models. When you move from the hardware phase to the software phase, you can put applications on it, and then there's also opportunities for smaller movers. But then we saw suddenly this DeepSeek, this Chinese company that no one had heard about, not even the Chinese leadership, and they launched a language model that was like maybe 1/10 of the price of the big ones, and it was very competitive. So maybe we're already in the phase of software. So it is huge opportunities. And let's face it, if you look at the most valuable companies in the world today, the 10 most valuable ones, many did not even exist 30 years ago. So there can be companies that will be the world-leading companies that are not started yet. They can be planned now in Bangalore, India, in a garage, and they can still be the biggest ones in the world in the future. So I think the jury is out. Is it going to be the winner takes it all? Is wealth going to trickle down? Is it going to increase already the challenges we have on the Gini coefficient today or not? It's a hard predict.
We are talking at a time when there's been a bit of a comeback of COVID, very marginally, but that raises the question, how prepared, Borge, do you think the world is for disease X? In a way, the COVID altered the world as we know it, and it took several years to come out of it. In terms of the overall healthcare system and the preparation, where do you think the world stands?
I wish we were in a stronger position, and I think all the geopolitical competition and fragmentation and polarization also leads to a situation where countries are just competing. But some of the most pressing challenges in the world, they're transboundary. So we know that COVID didn't stop on the border because they needed the passport. No, it spread very, very fast. So if you're going to be prepared for future pandemics, we have to work together. if we're going to deal with climate change, cybercrime, these are common challenges that can only be dealt with in a multilateral setting. But multilateralism is weakened. We have a more multipolar world with strong key actors, hard power instead of soft power. Multilateralism is weakened. A multipolar world with less multilateralism is a challenge.
Given what you just said, therefore, what reforms or investments do you believe should economies prioritize now in this multipolar world? You mentioned climate change, the environmental threats, there's economic volatility, and there are these geopolitical shocks that are taking place because of conflicts emerging in different parts of the world. From the forum's perspective, how do countries prioritize to ensure that they come out stronger at the other end of this disruption, of this age of disruption?
Of course, it's tough to give advice, but I would say invest in education, research and development. I think that's a key for the future. Invest in the youth, also primary, secondary education, because so many talented young people there and they need access to good education. Make sure that you don't get too indebted. If you have too much debt, your biggest thing on your state budget will be paying on your debt. So you should not be tempted to do that. I think also develop good trade agreements with other countries, because the multilateral system, WTO, is incredibly important, but there is hard to get new deals. So India now just did a deal with the United Kingdom. India is looking into the EU. I think that's something I would do. Then I would also avoid unnecessary red tape. Look at all the challenges EU has on this. And that is also what is in the Draghi report that says you have to reduce unnecessary red tape. And I would also invest in infrastructure, because infrastructure is critical. I would also invest in good governance, excellent courts, transparency. I would also, if I was India, the strength of India is it's the largest democracy in the world. There is also discussions about the future, open discussions like this, and I think this is a strength for India. So investing in the future means that you also have to have good order in your finances, sound fiscal policy, sound monetary policy, then also trying to be open on the trade side, I think is important.
Right, and very quickly before we wrap up this conversation, Borge, what's Davos next year going to be all about? I think that's a good point to end the conversation on.
It is how to manage in the new, very challenging geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape. But even if countries are competing, there are areas where they can find common interest on collaborating. Future pandemics, climate change, cybercrime, how to also make sure that we don't lose the baby with the bathwater on economic growth when it comes to tariffs and trade competition. So Davos is a place to get together, try to find solutions even under very difficult circumstances. And we do already expect the key global leaders there in Davos. And of course, we hope we will see Prime Minister Modi back in Davos in January too.
Finally, Mr. Brende, on a very personal note, if I were to ask you your biggest concern and the greatest hope you have for the world economy as we look beyond 2025, what makes you feel hopeful? What troubles you at night, if you at all have a sleepless night?
No, I don't have any babies in the house anymore, so I do sleep pretty well.
That's a good Norwegian way to be, sleep well.
Yeah, it is, you know. But I'm concerned about future wars. If we see new wars, that will kill growth. But I'm also positive that the world economy has been so resilient. So I'm thinking that, trade was the driver of growth for decades. Maybe the new technologies are already driving growth. They're increasing productivity. They're leading to investment. So I would say I don't think we will see a repetition of the 1970s with sluggish growth for a decade in the coming decade. I think still avoiding wars, still a way of collaborating. I think we will see growth, hopefully about 3% in the decade to come, and hence I sleep pretty well, and especially without the babies.
Well, very clearly, we will as well sleep well with your words, words of positive assessment on India and the world economy. And very clearly, Rajdeep, beyond trade, technology clearly seeming to be the driver that will help us overcome most of the uncertainties.
President and CEO of the World Economic Forum, Borge Brende, thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights with us. We look forward to seeing you at Davos 2026 from the entire team at Business India Today TV, and of course at India Today TV. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.